Hello and welcome everyone to today's How To Academy event. It is a pleasure to introduce author and filmmaker Sebastian Junger and journalist Sophie Roberts. Sebastian is the co-director of the documentary film Restrepo, which was nominated for an Academy Award. He is the winner of a Peabody Award and the National Magazine Award for Reporting. He's the author of Tribe, War, A Death in Belmont, and many more. His latest book, and the topic for today's conversation, Freedom, is out now. Sophie is a British writer whose work focuses on the wild places, from Papua New Guinea to the Congo. She regularly contributes to the Financial Times and to Condé Nast Traveler. In this live stream event, Sebastian and Sophie will explore his journey on the railroads on the East Coast of America. There will be time for your questions at the end, so please feel free to write them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Sebastian Junger and Sophie Roberts.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dana, and welcome, Sebastian. It's a real pleasure to be talking to you. I started your book at the end of last week. It's 150 pages. It's not the biggest book in my shelves, but I haven't been able to put it down. I've been digging back in and mining it like you wouldn't believe. In large part, because my goodness, this is a prose stylist of the first order. Every sentence is so eloquently crafted. And I really hope that in the course of the conversation, we'll hear some parts of that. I've certainly pulled some bits I love, and maybe you would like to do a small reading where it's appropriate. But just to set this conversation up, this is a book I found really deeply original. It's very modern in its narrative form. It's not quite a travel book. It's not quite a history book. It's not quite an abstract book of ideas. It's quite subversive in the way it approaches form and genre, and I find that very exciting. And it's really probing one of the biggest questions of being human, and that's about what freedom means through all sorts of elucidating digressions into the American frontier history, Chicago street gangs, snake catchers, Dublin in 1916. So I really hope you enjoy this conversation, and forgive me because I am a Brit. This is a British audience we're largely talking to, so I would love it, Sebastian, if you would start by really giving us the context of where this journey takes place, painting the picture of where in the world we are.
Well, thank you. When I was writing the book, if I had known someone would respond in the way that you just did to what I was working on, I would have been really, really thrilled, because I was hoping for something like that, exactly like that. So almost 10 years ago now, I took 2-3 guys that I was close to. We'd all been in a lot of combat, and we were sort of done with that. And 2 of them were US military vets, and there was me and another journalist, Spanish guy. And we walked from Washington, D.C. up the East Coast of the United States to Philadelphia. And then instead of continuing to New York, we turned west and headed for Pittsburgh. And we were traveling along the railroad lines. There's a rail corridor that goes up the East Coast, and another very important sort of trunk of the rail line that crosses the United States, and it goes from Philadelphia through Pennsylvania on to Chicago and on west. And we chose the railroad lines because there are these sort of swaths of no man's land that just crisscross America. They're technically private property owned by the freight companies. There are no police out there. Anyone else who's out there is pretty marginal, like we were, and so not really a threat to us. And you can do what you want. We were sleeping under bridges and in abandoned buildings and cooking over fires and drinking out of creeks. We didn't have a tent. We had to sort of be below the radar because it's illegal to be out there. There are no cops, but if they know you're out there, the cops will come and try to arrest you. And so they were looking for us once with a helicopter. We managed to evade them, and we moved on foot, carrying everything we needed, 40, 50, 60, 70 pounds on our back. We moved 10, 15, 20 miles a day. We walked 400 miles along these railroad lines. And as I say in the book, most nights we were the only people in the world who knew where we were. We called it high-speed vagrancy. And we were moving, you know, up the East Coast and then west along what was the Pennsylvania frontier in the 1700s, this sort of almost archetypal clash between civilization and native peoples that occurred in Pennsylvania, about 250 years ago. And we moved right through the heart of that area. And actually, that history was felt amazingly recent and sort of palpable.
No, you really feel that. And the idea which I just loved was this phrase that railroad lines are pathologically efficient. And it reminded me of when I was working in Russia and the way that Siberian tigers move through the snow is they take another animal's path because it's an easier route through a meter of deep snow. And you described this pathological efficiency of these railway lines, which were laid upon the roads that the settlers had built, which were laid upon the tracks that the Native Americans had made, which were laid upon the way that the river, and I can't pronounce it, forgive me, Juniata River?
The Juniata River, yes.
And that layering was something that I felt was a very, very core kind of narrative strand of how you were investigating history, because this journey took you back into that period of time. Would you mind just talking a little about that? Because the Native American story looms large on this frontier.
Yeah, I mean, all that research I did after the trip. Originally, we did the trip, and I wasn't intending to write a book. We just wanted to take a trip and encounter this country in this very raw way. Half of us, 2 out of the 4 men, were in the middle of getting divorced, and we needed a respite from the sort of drama of our lives. We never, and this may be a male thing, I don't know, the divorces never came up. Like the 2 guys, I was one of them, the 2 guys who were getting divorced never mentioned it, and the 2 other guys knew we were getting divorced, and they never asked about it. And in 400 miles, hundreds of campfires, whatever, it never came up. So it was a little bit of a vacation, a respite from these sort of sad struggles that we were all in some ways. But at any rate, yes, you're exactly right. So that we were walking along the railroad lines, which are unpatrolled and sort of easy for vagrants to move along. And those railroad lines were laid upon the settlers' roads, which followed the original Indian trails, which always invariably picked the easiest route through the mountains. And that easiest route inevitably is carved by a river. In this case, the Juniata River is the only river that trends east-west in Pennsylvania. And it carves right through the Allegheny Mountains. And, what happens is if mountains rise up slowly enough, the rivers that they rise up under have time to saw their way through the rising mountains. If the mountains rise up too fast or are made out of granite, the rivers have to go around. Well, in the case of the Juniata, it was able to carve through. So we were walking this ancient mobility corridor westwards through American history. And the Juniata in Seneca means standing stone. And at one point along this trek, there was a place where the native people of that area had a huge standing stone that was carved with sacred symbols of their tribe. And when the settlers took over that area, this enormous standing stone that was driven into the ground like a big, huge spear, was like, I think 15 feet tall, massive thing. It disappeared. And nobody knows how they moved it or where it is. It's never been found. And this is a culture that did not have horses. They didn't have mechanical advantage. And they moved this thing, and it's never been found. So that the word Juniata means standing stone, and it goes to the heart of this amazing place that we walk through.
Well, it's some of there's so many people that be listening that are. We'll talk about it some more, but the actual writing. I mean, there was one part. The trains were so heavy and fast that they seemed to set the whole world in motion, vibrating the air and raising a strange pitch from the rail that fell. I just love this. At the edge of human hearing. And that single phrase really, if people want to get a sense of what this book's about, it's, Sebastian, I feel you're giving a voice at the edge of human hearing. You're going into stories that haven't been written before, that are ungoogleable. They sit somewhere else. And I found that very exciting through the various digressions that you take. The other thing I'd like to ask you about, if I may, is the act of walking. interestingly, you're doing it with a group. Often walking is written about by travel writers as a solo occupation, but you do it as a group, and that brings a different kind of conclusion, really, or certainly a different investigation. Can you talk a little about what the act of walking as a group means as opposed to an individual?
Yeah, so we're social primates, and we're meant to function in groups, and certainly we're meant to do things that are physically hard and dangerous in groups. There's tens of thousands of years of evolution dictating that. And so when we were walking in a group, we had to stay out of the way of the trains because the trains were dangerous. We had to stay away from the cops. We had to get drinking water. There were a lot of things. It wasn't combat, but there were a lot of things we had to take care of. And we did it as a group. And the hardest thing we did out there really was walking. We were carrying a lot of weight, and we were walking through very cold temperatures in the winter, very, very hot temperatures in the summer. I mean, so hot that some of us started to get sort of heat failure. At one point, one of us had to take the pack of another guy because he was collapsing. And so then that guy had twice the weight, that he had, I mean, we sort of do anything for each other. But the trick is you have to, walking with that kind of effort it's a mental fight with your brain. I mean, your brain wants to give up. Your body will do what it's told, but your brain's like a little traitor, basically, and it wants to give up at the first opportunity. And so what you need to do is sort of trick it. And one of the ways you can trick it is to fall into, what I call cadence. And when you fall into cadence as a group, you are really buoyed along by the collective energy of the group that you're in. And when you're in a group, you have a responsibility. You cannot fail the group. You cannot stop, right? Certainly true in combat, but even in a situation like this, it's not up to you whether you keep walking or not. And as the group falls into cadence, this magical thing happens. And it takes a while, it takes an hour or two. This magical thing happens where it starts to feel easier to keep walking than to stop. And when you realize that you're reluctant to stop because stopping looks like it'll take a lot of effort, and continuing to walk feels easier, you're in cadence, and you can go 10, 20 miles like that without really feeling it. It's an extraordinary feeling. It's a kind of ecstatic state. And inevitably your body breaks down and the real world reclaims your physical processes. But for a while, you're in this sort of blessed state where you feel like you could go forever.
Yeah, you call it occasionally unstoppable, which was a fantastic phrase. But I just think there's so many people that there's a huge body of work out there of people that are walking solo. And this, again, is quite subversive because it's not about solo meditation. It's very much how the group works and the concept of freedom, which we'll get onto later in the conversation. The other thing that I would just like to pick up on that is, yes, you're absolutely right. If it had been a group of women, we would have been talking about divorce within about 18 seconds. And then for the next 400 miles. So that did amuse me. But the other thing is, and I think this is something I'd like to talk about, is the first person. Again, the expectation with the travel book is I. I do not get a single I until the last paragraph of the first third. And that's even, it's a my dog, it's never an I. And I don't get the I until right at the end of the book when I discover about the divorce being a motivation to perhaps take this journey and work some stuff out. But what led you to that way of writing? Did it come very easily, that way of writing, or was it a very conscious thing that after you kind of written all your field notes that you could not put that I in there? You did not want the I in there.
Well, I didn't really want to talk about any of us individually, because for a variety of reasons, but one of which was that we weren't the point. Right, we all had our particular biographies, and we were all struggling with various things, and whatever. We're people, and we had our own stories. But that wasn't what interested me, and I didn't want readers to get sidetracked by who each one of us was, and our names, and what we were each doing. And I wanted America to be the character that people were focused on. I wanted the ideas of freedom, the inquiry into freedom that I conducted, to be the sort of subject of the book. I didn't want, me and Guillermo and Dave and Brendan to be the subject, God forbid, you know, like, and I just have, as a journalist, I mean, I have occasionally written in first person as a journalist, but it's always because something about what I experienced illuminated a broader truth and made it a little bit more accessible for the reader. But the last thing I would ever want as a writer is to be like the focus of what I'm writing about. Like I'm not interested, and I'm the vehicle for something, but not the focus. And so what I would do is, like, you know, at one point, you know, somebody started shooting at us, right? I mean, America being America, there's a lot of guns laying around, and some guy, I think, just didn't like the look of us. You know, we looked, I think, probably pretty suspect, and he started shooting over our heads. And what I said was, you know, one of us grabbed the machete. All we had for defense was a machete. And I said, one of us grabbed the machete and circled around through the woods to try to come up behind the guy who was shooting and incapacitate him. And, you know, I don't say who that was. I just say we, right? One of us. And to me, that the loss of identity that occurs in a group like that is one of the sort of transcendent human experiences. I think, you know, people ask me, what's the definition of freedom? And there's many definitions, but one very good definition is the loss of one's ego, the loss of one's focus on oneself. I've recently experienced that as a father, as a new father, late in life, in my 50s. I have 2 little girls. The loss of ego that comes or should come with parenting is enormously liberating. It really is a form of freedom. Well, likewise in this group or in combat, same thing. You stop thinking about yourself. You're just part of a group. There's an enormous, ironically, an enormous liberation in that.
And it's being part of the group was pretty important, because as you described it, and you had this phrase, you were entering serious country. You know, you had to keep an eye on the weather, you had to keep an eye on that weapon, which was, and this is a wonderful word, thunked into a tree. Loved that word, heavily circled. But those, tell me what that was really like. Did you actually feel that you got close to this word wild? Did you ever feel you ever really in the wild in modern America?
Well, I mean, there are much wilder places in America. I mean, America is a big, wide open country. And, you know, if you want to go to Alaska and start walking, you won't see another person for a month if you want. You know, I mean, it's there. But we weren't interested in the wilderness. We were interested in American society. And the interesting thing for me about Railroad Line is it goes right through everything, right? It goes right through ghettos, right through rich suburbs, right through farms, right through woods and wilderness and industry and this awful sort of like mixed use wasteland of malls and highway exchanges. And, you know, I mean, America can waste space like no other country. You know, it goes through all of it. And there was you know, not surviving, but, you know, living out there as we were as vagrants. Each kind of environment required a different solution. Right. I mean, spending the night in an affluent suburb without getting picked up by the cops is a different challenge than in the wilderness. Right. So we were trying to be part of society and to get away with this thing, which was to be moving illegally and sleeping out where you're not supposed to be, right under the noses of society, and getting away with it. And it definitely appealed to the I'm going to be gendered here. It appealed to the 10-year-old boy in all of us, frankly. I mean, there were, you know, yeah, we could have done this in a place where, you know, the Appalachian Trail, which is this beautiful thing that goes through the mountains, we wouldn't have been breaking any rules. And all of a sudden, the whole component of this trip would have been lost to us. And frankly, that was less appealing. You know, we wanted to be on the edges of society and sort of toying with it a little bit.
There's a nice